Okay, this is going to be a discussion on Cubism as well as Futurism, and we're going to talk about Picasso and also Gonzalez in regards to Cubism, and then we're going to talk about Bala. Oh, wait, we also probably will talk about Dada, which will be the beginnings of this Surrealist movement. So the Dadists will come first, and then the Surrealists. Talk about Bala and Boccioni in the Futurists, and then we're going to talk about Duchamp in the Dada. And then we'll reserve the next video for Surrealism and everything else in chapter 29. Okay, so with Cubism, we're actually going to go to the beginning of the PowerPoint, and we're going to start with Picasso. So go to figure 29.1. And what's going to happen with the Cubist is going to be the most departure from conventionality. All right, it's going to take these ideas of Fauvism as well as Expressionism we saw in Germany, and it's going to really elaborate on the embrace of the abstract being the subject matter. So we're going to see simple shapes, we're going to see contrasting colors, and all that occur during this Cubist movement. Now, the Cubist movement has two different types. There's analytic, which we see with figure 29.1, and then there's something called synthetic. And I'll talk about what synthetic is and what analytic is here in just a second. So it's going to be the most abstractions. It's essentially going to be your beginning of the world accepting abstraction. And that's just because of the prolific nature of Picasso and the fact that Picasso was a realist painter and his ability to bridge realism that he had figured out by the age of 14 or 15, by the way, all the way to different color periods. So Picasso will go through a blue period, which is melancholy, which again comes from this Fauvist mentality with Matisse that warm colors and cool colors can create melancholy as well, or cool colors can create melancholy as well. And then he'll jump to like pink period. And he's coming out with figure 29.1, Demoiselle d'Avignon, is actually coming out of the pink period, which followed the blue period. And you can see there's still little elements of the blue period here with little active lines of that cerulean blue, which again comes from the Fauvist with Matisse. So he'll go through all these different periods, and so he's very prolific and very quick. And by him going through all these periods and him questioning his own style, like a couple years present to, let's say this is 1907, and then he questions his blue period, which is in 1905 or 04. He's questioning that by moving into this pink period. So he's constantly criticizing his own work, which opens up this whole avenue of new types of abstractions in modernistic Europe. So it's really Picasso, that's why he's so popular. He's almost like the pivotal point of a lot of this modernism during Europe at this time. And he'll become very politically active as well through his paintings, which we'll see with Guernica here at the end of his session. So, Picasso will be very experimental, but he will also be very well prepared for each piece. A lot of people think, oh, he just sat down and did this real quick. No, he actually will sketch and make what are called cartoons. Yeah, C-A-R-T-O-O-N, cartoons. This is where the word comes from. It's just a quick. So a sketch is to pick up quick placement of shape and form and where things are going to kind of be arranged on the canvas, on paper first, through drawing, through sketches, and then the cartoon is like an outline and a bolder contour definition of where these shapes and lines and designs are going to go on the canvas. So through this sketching into cartoons and then ultimately into the primary painting. And he will go from, 10 to 40 plus sketches before he actually starts putting paint on the canvas. All right, and his work is big. This is 8 feet by almost 8 feet tall. These are not small. So the work that he's created, like you'll see with Guernica, is very expansive. Guernica required more than 40 sketches and cartoons before he actually put paint on the canvas. So he's very well prepared. It's not just a sudden, quick, splash of activity. It is within the sketches, but then that leads up to the actual final piece. And he quickly shifted from one style to another, and from realism to all these color periods, like I already talked about. And that's what has allowed the embrace of the abstract to become the subject matter. Now, let's see what he does that with Demoiselle, as well as one of his still lifes, and then also Guernica. Those are the three we're going to look at, three paintings. So with Demoiselle, it's a new way to represent humans, all right? And what he's doing, he's actually referring to a certain genre, which is that of the nude, and in particular the female nude in this case. But in the past, the female nude was in a very passive position, all right, like reclining or on a couch or on a bed, or or crouched down, like with Degas and the tub, and it was a very voyeuristic approach where the male artist seemed to have dominance over the passivity of the nude female figure. But with Picasso, now I'm not going to say he wasn't a misogynist, he was, but with Picasso in this piece in particular, he made the nude female seem threatening and more powerful and more bold, all right? And he did that through his studies in the museum. And he would look at artwork around the world, in particular in Africa, and he would refer to the queen mothers of these African tribes as very strong, prominent, matriarchal features and individuals in those families. So he would take that concept of this strong woman and he applied it in this very bold and threatening manner by using simple forms, by using bold contrasting colors, and by using these sharp, jagged lines. So the whole concept of the nude genre, with the female nude in particular, has shifted from a passivity state to a very complex and almost threatening like state, where she is the center and she's very powerful. But he also has other variations in here, and one that's really key is he's turned one of, which I love, to the far left, a Greek male Kouros sculpture, something that it goes all the way back to 480 BCE, before Common Era, with what's called a Kouros sculpture, which means young male. And he shifted it into this very bold and threatening female-like form, which is a total contradiction to the name Kouros, which means youthful lad or youthful boy. And he's converted it into this female nude, which is taking this classical antiquity idea and completely flipping it upside down on its head, which I love. So that's what's happening to the far left there with that individual that looks like she is stepping into the environment. It's meant to be derived from the Greek Kouros, Kouros sculpture. And the Kouros sculpture, interesting enough, is a variation of the Egyptian pharaoh sculptures, which is northern Africa. So he's kind of bringing Africa around from the south to the top in this one, through his studies in the museums of African art, in this one painting. All right. So based on studies of art around the world, Africa in particular, and the reason that it's called Cubist is that a year after the painting, this painting was done, so in 1908, it got termed as Cubist to reject natural depictions of the human form. This is why it's called Cubist. It rejects natural depictions of the human form, and then shapes and forms are abstracted from the perceived world. And what Picasso said is that he paints forms as he thinks of them, instead of how he sees them. So it's becoming very psychological, if you will. It's being very cerebral. And with Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung soon to step into the scene at this time, it's very much a cerebral time. And you got to think about, most people physically are seeing death and destruction with these great worlds or great wars in Europe, and then also the decay of individuals that can't make it in the urbanization of this industrial time in Europe. People very poor, starving, famished, all these different things going on. So people are getting inside of their minds. Whenever things are not physically working properly around them, often psychologically we go into our mindset. And this is kind of an exposure of that mindset of Picasso at this time. And that's where the Cubist idea comes from him, his own personal perception on objects around. Now, don't forget, he could render things realistically to almost sheer perfection, which is called, what is that called? Mimesis. You don't have to know that, but it's called mimetic or mimesis, where you render something almost perfectly to the T on what you see. He's taken that training and he's like flipped it upside down on its head. Now, this type of Cubist painting is called analytic, Analytic, and it's derived from what Cézanne did in Mont Victoire that we saw as a post-impressionist in the last chapter. All right, and now this is what makes it analytic. It's a breakdown of objects to their constitutive parts. So, if something like the head is oval in shape, he will create an oval and kind of distort it a little bit. Instead of trying to fill in that oval with all the perfect renderings of a face and the realistic features of a face, he'll break it down to that very simple geometric shape of an oval. And then from that oval, or from those basic simple shapes, he's then going to recompose them into a somewhat coherent and independent picture. So that's his personal discretion on how he wants to aesthetically design and compose these different parts. But he wants it to be coherent because he doesn't want to lose you completely. He wants you to be able to connect to the different objects as they're recomposed or reconstructed. And that's what makes it abstract. It's an emphasis and a magnification of these simple forms rearranged slightly, distorted and jagged and sharp and altered, but still you can land in different areas on the painting and feel comfortable to a certain degree. So that's what analytic Cubist is, and that's what he's doing here with Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, figure 29.1. So be able to take what I just said and kind of break down some specific elements within this painting based off of that content. Then he's going to, and we got to drop down in the PowerPoint because they put that painting at the very beginning of the PowerPoint. But we're going to now go to figure 29.14, and he's going to quickly shift in just like what, 6-7 years. So now this is 1912, his different approach to cubism, and he's going to generate what's called synthetic cubism, synthetic cubism. And this is going to be more of a move into mixed media or a three-dimensional use of cubism. So what he's doing here, this is still life with a chair caning, is he's constructing now versus deconstructing. So in the analytic cubism, it's deconstructing down to basic geometric forms, taking that and then rearranging it on the canvas. Here, he's deconstructed shapes, but now he's going to physically construct with them. There, he was creating implied construction with the paint, but here he's literally taking different objects and he's going to construct with them. How he does that is he's going to cut out different multiple sources. So he'll do different drawings, different paintings, and he'll cut out the objects that have been deconstructed to their basic, simple geometric shape. Then he's going to collage them together physically after cutting them out of the canvas or paper, put it all together, and then he's going to use three-dimensional materials like literally chair caning. So you can see this is made of oil, oilcloth, and rope and canvas. And he's using the canvas to create this chair caning. And the rope that's going around the oval framing of the piece. So synthetic cubism is a combination of painting as well as three-dimensional design. All right, so that's why it's called synthetic, meaning that it is being synthesized by the composer or the artist, being Picasso himself. And it's a departure from the analytic that he originally did with Les Demoiselles prior to this piece, right? So that's synthetic cubism. Now let's see how he gets into the political scene. And that's figure 29.16, Guernica. All right, 11 foot by 25 feet. All right, this is huge. And recall what I said, this took about 40 to 45 sketches or cartoons prior to the actual Guernica, the painting itself, before he put any paint down. So he's well prepared. He doesn't just quickly do it like a lot of people think with abstract painters. It's like, they just do it really fast. No, there's a lot of preparation, there's a lot of thought, a lot of mindfulness behind it. So this is political. This is very political. And it's political because of what happened in Guernica, Spain, on the border of Spain and France, where they were bombed by the Nazi Party and over 7,000 people died. Now, that's from 1937. This is the beginning of World War II now. So he took it very personally. He wasn't going to do it, but then that bombing happened, and he essentially picked up his brush as his munition and his weaponry to show what war can do. Now this is going to be very crucial and important because this is going to move into the surrealist and also into the non-objectivity of another group of artists coming out of Germany. And this is going to pave the way to show what warfare really does to people. So Guernica, it's a political view now, and he's using it to express that point. And it's based on the 7,000 people that died from the Nazi bombing. Now, there's no specific person from Guernica here, nor is there any specific attack of bombing of the Nazi Party. He stayed neutral to that aspect because he didn't include the Nazi Party in the bombing blitzkrieg of Guernica, but it is a direct representation of that physical bombing that happened in Guernica, hence the title. So he removes the specific activities of what happened in Guernica, the opponent, the protagonist and the antagonist, but he labels it Guernica so that people know where he's done his research about where this painting has come from. So I talked about the different 42 to 45 sketches and cartoons that he did, and it's a condemnation of war. All right, it's his anti-war cry is really what it is. You can see that a soldier in the bottom center left has fallen back. His right hand stretched out with the sword broken away. The horse is trampling on top of his body. Right above that, you have a woman to the far left underneath a bull, which is supposed to be a bull of devastation and destruction. And you have a woman that's crying, holding her child in her hands from the unfortunate demise of children during war. You have to the very far right a woman that's trying to flee out of a building that's on fire. You have another one that's coming out aimlessly, not knowing what to do. You have a third that's this kind of amorphous like face of a woman without a body coming out in a ghastly manner, and her arm is elongated with a candle to show and expose the consequences of war. So that's what all these different elements are, is to kind of shine a light. And then you have a main light source that's up in the top center to the left, that's asymmetrical from the center of the painting, that's supposed to expose this light of exposure of the consequences of war. And that's why all these different elements are there. Now, the bull is interesting because that dates all the way back to ancient Mesopotamia, when warfare first began in Western world. And all these different Mesopotamian polytheistic pagan rulers were off to try to defeat one another in ancient Mesopotamia. And the bull was often the symbol of that ruler. And that bull originally was a benign leader, because the bull, or the bovine, was followed during the Paleolithic period with the hunters and gatherers to find where the reindeer was, to find where to search for food, and the caribou. But the bull suddenly became a symbol of leadership with these Mesopotamian rulers and these Assyrian rulers that ultimately used that symbol for dominance and rulership and leadership over other regions of Mesopotamia. So the origin of that bull was a benign thing and a positive thing for leadership, for the hunters and gatherers that just wanted to eat and then make art. But then it was used and changed in a propaganda tool to show leadership of a human versus leadership of following a bull. All right, so the symbolism is there. It's full of symbolism. Let's see. He used Cubist style for effect by showing fragmentation and dislocation of anatomy, which made everything look threatening, like we saw with Demoiselle. So there's this threatening aspect of what the Cubist style can do. And he did that here to show, again, those consequences of war by fragmenting and dislocating different parts of the anatomy of the human being. So again, taking a very unconventional approach to what the human form looks like. And just like what death has done in warfare, it's very unconventional to have different parts of your body blown off from a bomb. That is not typically the derivative response of death. It's a very man-made death. So it's a very militaristic. Nothing against military. It's a very aggressive technique using different industrial warfare devices to render a person dead, which is something that really wasn't seen prior to the two industrial revolutions that occurred during this time. So he's showing that. And he suppressed the use of color so that he could emphasize the tragedy even more, leaving it neutral. All right, leaving it neutral. Not saying anti country here, positive country here. He left it neutral by not including a specific type of military personnel in a country, like for example the Nazis. And he also left the colors very neutral so that there's no emphasis on any emotion of a warm color or a cool color. He left it neutral, so it's like it's losing all color whatsoever. It's ghastly in nature, just like the demise of a body. Whenever it enters into death, it becomes very colorless. It becomes very ghastly. So he's using color in that way. Okay, so let's talk about his buddy and some sculpture and how that was influenced by Picasso. We're going to look at Gonzalez, figure 29.19, woman combing her hair. So we're shifting now from a very intense political piece by Picasso into a sculpture. And this is his buddy. He worked alongside with Picasso. He helped Picasso make sculptures as well. Picasso actually has more noted ceramic pieces painted upon than actual paintings. So he was prolific in everything. He used all kinds of materials. So with Gonzalez, he's actually using new technologies of the industrial revolutions, and he's borrowing from these industrial techniques to make his work. And the main one is that he comes from a family of welders and metal workers. So he's taking the technique of welding different iron and steel and bronze and all these different things, and he's taking this this new trade that he's learned as a welder, and he's creating these very abstract, almost cubist-like based, and definitely faux-based sculptures. So let me break it down here. So he worked with Picasso, and by working with Picasso, he learned how to combine linear and volumist shapes. So you see a volume-esque shape in the very bottom of the figure, and then it becomes very linear and very light up towards the top. So he, like what Picasso taught him alongside, he reduced the components of the individual parts of the woman combing her hair into these geometric shapes. So a very analytic, cubist-like approach that he learned from Picasso. All right, very analytic, futuristic, or very analytic, cubist-like approach that he learned from Picasso. All right, so that's Cubism. Now let's find out what's going on in Italy, and we'll leave this video with the Futurist. And we're going to look at figure 29.22, and then we're going to look at 29.23. So with Futurism, it's happening in Italy, and they are really in a league of their own for a very specific reason. They're socio-political. They actually started as a literary group, the Futurists, and then these ideas that were written down in what are called manifestos found their way into the art scene. So it started in books, all right? It started in what are called manifestos. And it's based off of what they were noticing in Italy, and that a sense of artfulness and a sense of a new era of consciousness and a new era of livelihood was decaying. So in Italy at this time, during these great wars, this was 1912, so just before the beginning of World War II, they were seeing a decay. So we haven't really been talking about Italy that much. We did during the Renaissance and the Baroque, but whenever we're talking about Impressionism and then the Rococo and Neoclassicism, but once Napoleon stepped into the scene during that neoclassical time, Italy kind of went off the radar, and it slowly started to decay socially and politically. And the Futurists are a response to that social decay, because it all became about France, and it all became about Germany, and it all became about these northern European countries and not so much Italy. So they are essentially creating these manifestos to bounce Italy back into the scene, which is interesting because right after this they become a huge component, especially in World War II. And I'm not saying pro or con the Futurists, but it did set up a certain type of pompousness in Italy that came through, what was his name during World War II? The main prime minister, ruler of Italy. I forgot. Anyway, he was good buddies with Adolf Hitler, so that pretty much sums it up right there. So the Futurists actually saw war as a cleansing agent to a new era. So essentially, they're sitting back there in Italy going, oh yeah, just go on, have all this warfare up there in Europe, because you're going to wipe yourself out. It's going to cleanse out society, and then we Italians, not directly Italians, but we, the Futurists, are going to be able to revitalize Italy and make it a prominent feature in Europe again, which it was for the longest time, all the way back to the Roman Empire. But it again went downhill, and now the Futurists are taking advantage of the warfares of the Great War and the Second Great War to cleanse Europe and then revitalize Italy. So they embraced the speed and the industrial dynamic elements of warfare, of the mechanics of warfare. They embraced it. They embraced more elements and weapons of destruction that would kill off people. And they embraced the speed of this weaponry and this machinery so that it would hurry up faster, so they could hurry up and get into this new era. And that's why they're called Futurists, because they're thinking about the future of Italy being the epicenter, or of the Futurists being the epicenter of all activities after these great wars come to an end. Really quite interesting. Gosh, what was that? What is that prime minister's name? Not a prime minister. He actually was he was a dictator, not a prime minister, like Adolf Hitler, a dictator. Um, oh, it's right on the tip of my tongue. I forgot. Anyway, this is not history. This is art history. But so these two artists, Bala, the dynamism of a dog on a leash, and then also figure 2923, Boccioni, unique forms of continuity in space, are supposed to reflect this manifesto of kind of a cleansing, war being a cleansing agent to a new era. So, but they're very simple forms that represent something much greater in the psyche of the futurist. So, with figure 29.22, dynamism of a dog on a leash, it's both of these are supposed to embrace that sense of speed and dynamism. And how they do that is motion is repeated in the shape. All right. So you can see the dog's little legs, you can see his ears, you can see his tail, the feet of the woman, the chain that connects the two. It's creating this sense of implied speed, and it's making it dynamic based off of the repetition of the form, being the foot, being the leg, being the tail, being the ears, being the chain. And then it's simulating many views, like what the cubists would do. So they're playing from the cubists, simulating different angles and perspectives of one object, of one shape. And that's what makes it dynamic, is that simulated desire to show multiple angles. Now this one is about the source. Okay, so this is about showing speed and dynamism through modern technology, and there is a source of energy and speed, and that is the woman and the dog. All right, versus a counterpart to Bala is Boccioni, unique forms of continuity in space, and this is supposed to show the same concepts of speed and dynamism, but with no source. The source itself, which would be the figure walking forward, is lost in different components of this sculpture. So let me tell you how. So spatial effects and forms of motion are present here. So like a figure is walking through space, there's open form between the legs, and there are formal qualities, different planes and linear elements that fit to design principles using a plane, which is a flat source, and a line, which is a segmentation between 2 points. Those are the formal qualities that are present here in the mass of the sculpture. But they're being obscured by the motion or the speed of the form. So it's not about the source in which the motion is part of, because it's being obscured almost like it's being cladded in a whole bunch of thick drapery. So it's not about the human that's actually moving forward. It's more about the formal aspects of implied motion and time and speed that are cladding this form. Because the form gets lost behind the blurred motions and its contour. All right. So be able to compare and contrast how with this one the form is lost based off of the motion, versus the first one, Abala 2922, the form is enhanced based off of the source of the motion, the dog and the woman. All right. So the narrative is a little different, but the manifesto is the same. It's all about speed, and it's all about dynamic use of shape repeated in different perspectives to reinforce the manifesto of the futurist that speed and dynamism of a subject is required visually to cleanse for this new era. Right? So that's the futurist manifesto. Believe it or not. Okay, I will leave you at that, and then we will get into the next video.